The terminal at LaGuardia Airport was nearly empty at midnight, the way airports feel in the quiet hours between one world and the next. Erida Akim moved through the long corridor with her head down and her bright red cable-knit sweater pulled close around her shoulders, her carry-on bag rolling behind her with a small rhythmic squeak against the polished floor that felt far too loud in the silence. She had packed in 11 minutes. She knew because she had counted every second, listening for footsteps in the hallway outside the bedroom door. 4 years. 4 years of learning to count seconds, to read the weight of silences, to understand the air temperature of a room before she entered it. 4 years of being told she was fragile, that she was lucky, that the only family left to her now was Jerry, and she had better hold on to that with both hands. Her parents had died in a car accident when she was 19. She had been 22 when she met Jerry Okafor at a grief support group, and he had been so warm then, so certain and steady and sure of her. She had not understood yet that certainty can be a weapon as much as a comfort, depending on who holds it and what they want. The flight to Chicago was boarding at gate 14B. She had chosen Chicago because Nina was there. Nina Sullivan, from her freshman year accounting class at Howard University, the one friendship Jerry had never quite managed to reach in Poison. She had texted Nina from the locked bathroom 40 minutes ago, "I am coming. Please do not tell anyone." Nina had written back in under 30 seconds, "I will be there. Come." Erida handed over her boarding pass with hands that would not stop trembling and found her seat. Row 12, seat B. A middle seat because she had booked it 40 minutes before departure and it was all that remained. She lifted her bag into the overhead bin and sat down, and that was when she became fully aware of the person already seated in 12A. He was enormous. That was the first word that arrived, plain and accurate. The man in the window seat occupied his space completely and then some. He was at least 6'4", with shoulders so broad they pressed against the partition beside him. His forearms rested on his knees, and every inch of visible skin below the rolled-up sleeves of his deep navy shirt was covered in tattoos. Dark, dense geometric patterns that traveled from his knuckles past his elbows and disappeared beneath the fabric. His neck carried ink too, curving lines that swept up toward a strong, clean jaw. Dark eyes moved to her the moment she sat. They assessed her in a single, unhurried pass, the way experienced people look at a room rather than at a person. Then they returned to the window. He said nothing. She said nothing. The plane filled around them. A young woman with a toddler took the aisle seat and arranged her bags quietly. The cabin crew moved through the aisles. The overhead lights dimmed slightly. The engines began their low, building hum beneath the floor. Erida pressed her spine against the seat back and fixed her eyes on the headrest in front of her. Her hands, folded in her lap, would not be still. She pressed them flat against her thighs and breathed in through her nose, counting the way her body had learned to do in moments that felt too large to hold. In for 4. Hold for 4. Out for 4. She did not look at the man beside her again. But she felt him turn his head and look at her. "You all right?" The voice was low and quiet, shaped by a New York accent that had been worn smooth by time. It was not a booming voice. It was the voice of a man who had learned that volume was rarely necessary. She kept her eyes on the headrest. "Fine." He did not push. He looked back at the window and the plane began to taxi, and the runway lights stretched out ahead of them in 2 long lines of cold blue-white, reaching into the dark. Erida thought about Nina's apartment, about the guest room Nina had described over text once. A yellow cotton bedspread, a window that faced east, good morning light. She held that image in her chest like something she could press her weight against, and she kept breathing. She did not think about the bruise on her left arm, still purple-green beneath the red sleeve of her sweater. She did not think about the sound the front door would make when Jerry found the bedroom empty. She did not think about whether he had contacts at the airline, whether he was already calling people, whether he was already on his way to the airport in the black car he kept for occasions that required speed. The plane lifted. The city fell away below them, its lights becoming small and scattered across the dark like coins dropped on dark velvet. Erida exhaled a breath that had, she realized, been building for 4 years. 20 minutes passed. The man beside her did not speak again. When he did, he was not looking at her. He simply set a small plastic bottle of water on the shared armrest, right at the boundary between their spaces, and he left his hand there for 1 moment and then withdrew it. "They won't come around with the cart for a while," he said, still looking at the dark outside his window. She looked at the bottle. Then she picked it up. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once, a small, contained movement. The acknowledgement of a man who understood that some things were made smaller and more real by not being named. His name was James Ferrara. She would not learn this until later. In certain rooms in New York, Miami, and Chicago, His name was spoken with a particular kind of care. He had run the Ferrara organization for 11 years, a family operation built over 6 decades along the eastern seaboard. He had a reputation that caused other powerful men to choose their words slowly when they were in his presence. What Erita Hakim had access to at 30,000 feet was none of that. What she had was the fact that he had placed water within her reach without asking her a single question about why she needed it. He had not pushed. He had not filled the silence with the kind of attention that feels like a debt forming. Somewhere over Pennsylvania, her body simply stopped holding itself upright. She fell asleep, her head tipping slightly to the side, her red sweater rising and falling in the slow rhythm of someone who had finally, just for now, run out of fear to spend. James looked at her for a long moment. He looked at the way her hands were still pressed flat against her thighs even in sleep, muscle memory of a life spent keeping herself contained. He noticed the edge of bruising at her left wrist where the sleeve had ridden up a few inches. He had grown up reading rooms. In his world, you learned quickly how to understand danger and fear and deception in the people around you, or you did not last long. He could walk into any space and know in 30 seconds who was afraid, who was lying, who was trying to make themselves invisible. He reached up and adjusted his reading light so the beam pointed away from her face. Then he turned back to the dark outside the window and thought, as he had been thinking for 3 years now, about the long and careful work of becoming a man who deserved a different kind of room. She woke as the plane began its slow banking turn over the lake, the city lights of Chicago spreading wide and brilliant below the window. For one unguarded moment she did not know where she was. Then the seatbelt sign chimed, and her body caught up with her mind, and she straightened with a small sound and reached up to press her palm against her hair. The man beside her was still awake. He had a phone in one large hand, held low at his knee though the screen was off. He was looking out the window at the city below. "We're about 40 minutes out," he said without turning. "You've been asleep for most of it." "I'm sorry." The words came out automatically before she could stop them. The reflex of someone who had spent 4 years apologizing for taking up space. "Why?" he said. Simple and flat, not unkind. She had no answer to that. She smoothed her red sweater and folded her hands in her lap and looked at the seat pocket in front of her. "I'm James," he said after a moment. He did not offer a last name. "Erita." She did not offer one either. He extended his hand without ceremony. She shook it. His grip was controlled, nothing forced in it, and she noted that his hand, covered in ink from the knuckle to the wrist, was somehow warmer than she had expected. "First time in Chicago?" he asked. "No. I went to school not far from here. Howard in Washington, but I had a friend from there who moved to Chicago after." She was not sure why she told him that. She had meant to say yes and leave it at that. "Good city," he said. "If you know the right parts of it." "Do you?" A corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile but the shape of one. "I have some business there. I've spent time." She wondered what kind of business a man who looked like this conducted in Chicago, and then decided she did not need the answer right now. She had enough to carry. The cabin crew came through the aisle with the cart. James flagged them down and ordered 2 coffees before she could speak, and when the woman leaned across and asked Erita if she would like anything, James said, "We're fine, thank you," in the same quiet way he said everything, and somehow this small act of inclusion, the simple word "we," made something in Erita's chest go very still for a moment. She accepted the coffee. It was too hot and too weak, the way airplane coffee always was, and she was grateful for it in the way you are grateful for ordinary things when ordinary things have been taken from you for a long time. They sat in silence for a while. It was not the uncomfortable kind. It was the kind of silence that forms between two people who are both carrying something they are not ready to put down. Outside the window the city grew slowly larger, its grid of orange and white light spreading toward every horizon. "What kind of business brings you to Chicago at midnight?" she asked, and was surprised again that she had spoken. He turned from the window and looked at her directly for the first time since she had boarded. His eyes were very dark, long-lashed, the kind of eyes that were used to looking at things and understanding them without being told. "Hotels," he said. "I'm opening one. Or converting one, more accurately." She nodded. "That sounds legitimate." Something moved in his expression. Not offense. Something closer to recognition. "It is," he said. The plane shifted. A pocket of air, mild turbulence, not enough to alarm the cabin but enough to make Erita grip the armrest with both hands. Her right hand landed on top of his left hand, which had been resting there. She pulled away immediately with a low, automatic apology. "You're fine," he said, steady and unhurried. He did not make a thing of it. She breathed. The plane smoothed out again. "Do you have somewhere to stay?" he said after a moment. "In Chicago." "Yes. A friend. She's meeting me." "Good." He said it with a certainty that made it sound like a door being quietly closed on a dangerous alternative. "That's good." She looked at him sideways. "You were worried." He seemed to consider whether to answer honestly. Then, "You got on a midnight flight alone with 11 minutes of luggage and you haven't stopped watching the back of the seat in front of you since LaGuardia." He paused. "A person notices things." She said nothing. There was nothing to say because he was not wrong. "Whoever it is," he said looking back at the window, "they're behind you now." It was a simple statement. Not a promise, not a grand declaration. Just a fact offered plainly. She did not know then how much that plain fact would cost him, and how deliberately he would make it true. The descent announcement came over the speakers. The city below them rose up to meet the plane, and Erita Hakim held her coffee with both hands and let herself, just this once, believe him. O'Hare was busy even at this hour, the arrivals hall lit by long banks of white fluorescent light, travelers moving in scattered streams toward the exit doors. Erita kept close to the wall as she moved, her carry-on behind her, her phone in her hand showing Nina's last text. "Train delayed. 45 minutes. I'm so sorry. Come out to arrivals and wait by the center pillar." She was almost at the exit doors when her phone buzzed with another message from Nina. She slowed, glancing at the screen, and in that one slowed moment she looked up through the glass doors ahead and saw him. Jerry was standing on the other side of the sliding doors in a slate-gray suit, his arms at his sides, his face arranged in the particular controlled expression he always wore when he had already decided how a situation was going to end. He had a car behind him, its hazard lights blinking orange in the dark. He had found out. She did not know how. She had bought the ticket in cash at the airport, she had told no one, she had done everything right. She stopped walking. Her body went cold and flat, the way it always did in that first moment when she understood she had lost. It was a specific feeling, a settling like the last bit of air going out of something. She had felt it dozens of times. The doors slid open. Jerry stepped inside. "There you are." His voice was quiet and level, the voice he used in public. "I've been calling you." "Jerry. You left your phone in the bedroom." "I brought it." He reached into his jacket pocket and held out her old phone, the one she had not taken because he had put tracking software on it 6 months ago. She had left it deliberately. He knew she had. "I'm not coming back," she said. She kept her voice low. "Let's talk about this in the car." He reached for her arm. "I would not do that." The voice came from behind her, and the temperature in the immediate air seemed to change. Jerry's hand stopped before it reached Erita. His eyes moved to a point over her shoulder and stayed there, and she watched something she had never seen on his face before. Genuine uncertainty. She turned. James Ferrara had come through the arrivals corridor a few paces behind her, still moving at the same unhurried pace he had used the entire night. He stopped beside her, close but not touching, and looked at Jerry with the calm, measuring expression of a man who had never once needed to raise his voice. "Is this man your husband?" James asked, addressing Erita but keeping his eyes on Jerry. "Legally, yes," she said. "Legally," James repeated as though weighing the word. He looked at Jerry. She said no. "I think you heard her." "I don't know who you are," Jerry said, and his voice was still controlled but it had shifted registers slightly, the way voices do when the speaker is recalculating quickly. James said his name. Just his first and last name, plainly, the way you state a fact. It was enough. Jerry Okafor was a man who knew names, who tracked power in rooms the way other men tracked weather. His expression went very still. "This is a private family matter," Jerry said. "She is standing in an airport at midnight with one carry-on bag and no intention of going anywhere near that car," James said. "I don't think this is what private family matters look like." He reached into his jacket pocket, produced his phone, and sent a single text without looking at the screen. 30 seconds later, Tony Marchetti materialized from the direction of the short-term parking entrance. He was broad-shouldered, perhaps an inch shorter than James, wearing a dark forest green jacket, and he walked with the easy confidence of a man who was entirely comfortable in whatever room he happened to be standing in. He came to stand beside James and nodded at Erita with a warmth that surprised her entirely. "Mr. Okafor," Tony said pleasantly. "Your car is blocking a fire lane." Jerry looked from Tony to James to Erita. The calculation on his face was visible now, the rapid reassessment of what he had believed this moment would cost him versus what it was actually going to cost. He put the old phone back in his jacket pocket. "This isn't finished," he said. He was talking to Erita, but his eyes moved briefly to James before he turned and walked back through the sliding doors. Tony followed him at a comfortable distance to ensure the car moved. Erida stood very still for a moment. The arrivals hall continued around her, indifferent, full of reunions and rolling luggage, and a couple near the far wall arguing softly about something unimportant. "He'll come back," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "He will try," James agreed. "But now he knows there is something in the way." He paused. "Your friend is delayed?" She looked at her phone. Nina's text was still on the screen. 45 minutes. Maybe more. "Then let me take you somewhere warm to wait." He said it the way he said most things. Simply, with no pressure in it, as though he were offering a fact and leaving the choice entirely to her. Erida Hakim had spent 4 years in a life where no one ever left the choice entirely to her. She looked at this enormous, tattooed, dark-eyed stranger and thought about the water bottle on the armrest and the way he had turned the reading light away from her sleeping face, small things she had no reason to know about except that she did know about them, the way the body sometimes understands something before the mind catches up. "All right," she said. The Ferrara Grand Chicago was a tower of glass and warm light set 2 blocks from the river, 32 stories of polished marble and wide windows that caught the city's glow and held it. The lobby was open and high-ceilinged, its floor a pale cream marble that reflected the golden pendant lights strung above in long sweeping arcs. It smelled faintly of white flowers and clean linen. Erida stood just inside the entrance and looked up at the ceiling. She had been inside expensive hotels before, in the early years with Jerry when he had still been performing the version of himself that wanted to impress her. But those hotels had felt performative, like a stage set. This one felt like someone had actually thought about what a person might need after a long night, and arranged the space accordingly. "I own it," James said, watching her look at it. "Or I will, once the paperwork on the final transfer is complete. We're converting the whole property to legitimate hospitality operations." She turned to look at him. He had said it without embarrassment, that word, legitimate, as though he had made a decision about what things were called and saw no reason to soften it. "You said that on the plane," she said. "Converting." "I did. What does that mean exactly for a man in your position?" A brief pause. "It means 3 years of legal work, asset restructuring, and a very expensive attorney named Carlo Ricci who charges by the syllable." He said it without apparent regret. "It means the organization I inherited from my father runs legitimate businesses now. Hotels, restaurants, a catering operation, a property management firm. Clean money. Honest work. And the people who were not happy about that? Some of them are no longer affiliated. Some of them came along." He moved toward the front desk. The ones who mattered most came along. Tony had appeared ahead of them, leaning against the desk talking to a young woman behind the counter who was trying very hard not to look starstruck. When he saw them approach, he straightened and produced a key card with the practiced ease of someone who had anticipated this moment. "Suite 2804, he said, handing it to James. He smiled at Erida. "Tony Marchetti. I'm sorry about all the drama at the airport. Not exactly a welcome committee." "You were very effective," she said because it was true. His grin widened. He had the kind of face that was hard not to like, open and unself-conscious. "That's the best thing anyone's ever said to me." James pressed the key card into Erida's hand. "The suite is yours for as long as you need it. No conditions attached to that." She looked at the card. "I don't have money for this." "I did not say anything about money," he said. "James." "Erida." He met her eyes steadily. "You sat next to me on a plane. You drank a bottle of water. You let me stand beside you when you needed someone standing beside you. That is not a debt. It is barely even an introduction." She did not have a response to that, so she took the key card. The suite on the 28th floor was white and gold and very quiet. Tall windows ran along one wall, and beyond them Chicago was laid out like something imagined. Towers of light, the black ribbon of the river, the broad dark of the lake in the distance. The bedspread was a deep ivory, not yellow, not the yellow she had pictured in Nina's guest room, but clean and high in hers for tonight. She called Nina from the chair by the window. Nina picked up immediately. "Erida, where are you?" "My train is still stuck at Addison. I'm going to come get you, just tell me where." "I'm at the Ferrara Grand," Erida said. Silence. "Nina. You're at the Ferrara Grand." Nina's voice had changed registers. "Who is with you?" "A man named James. He helped me at the airport. Jerry was there, Nina, he found out somehow, and this man." "What does he look like?" "Tall. Very tall. Tattooed. Dark eyes. Italian, I think." Another silence, longer this time. "Erida," Nina said carefully. The man who helped you is James Ferrara. He runs, or ran depending on who you ask, one of the most significant organized crime operations in the northeastern United States. Erida looked at the door of the suite, closed and quiet. I know, she said. You know. I guessed. He told me he's transitioning the whole thing to legitimate business. He has been saying that for 3 years. People in certain circles take it seriously now. Nina paused. Are you safe? Erida thought about the water bottle. The turned reading light. The way he had stood beside her at the airport, steady and calm, not grabbing, not demanding, simply present. I think so, she said. I think I might be, yes. She stood at the tall window after she hung up, her red sweater still on, her carry-on bag unopened on the luggage rack, and she looked out at Chicago spreading endlessly below her. Behind her was everything she had run from. Ahead of her was a city full of light and a window that faced east. She pressed her palm flat against the cool glass and let herself stand there for a long time. Morning arrived in the suite like a slow tide, light moving across the ivory bedspread in a long pale stripe that reached Erida's face and woke her gently. For one suspended moment she did not know where she was or what had been left behind. Then the detail of the previous night arranged itself, and she lay still for a moment, taking stock. She was alive. She was in Chicago. Jerry was not in this room. She showered and put on fresh clothes from her carry-on bag, a pair of dark trousers and a bright teal blouse that she had packed without thinking, purely because it was on top. She braided her natural curls back loosely and looked at herself in the bathroom mirror for a long time. She had not looked at herself in a mirror without bracing for something in a long time. The woman looking back at her was tired. But her eyes were her own. She took the elevator down to the lobby and followed the smell of espresso and something warm and buttery toward the hotel restaurant. The main dining room was bright with morning light coming through the east-facing windows, and at its edge was an archway leading to the kitchen, from which came the sound of someone moving efficiently and singing something low and tuneful in Italian. Erida stopped in the archway. The kitchen was large and professional and immaculately clean, and in the center of it stood a woman in a cobalt blue apron tied tight around a generous figure. She had dark hair streaked with silver pinned up in a practiced knot, and she was rolling pastry dough with the focused ease of someone who had done this 10,000 times. A coral scarf was tied around her wrist like a bracelet. The woman looked up and saw Erida in the doorway and did not miss a stroke. You must be the girl from the plane, she said. Her accent was warm and New York Italian, the kind that has been in a city long enough to become its own dialect. Sit. I will bring you something. I don't want to interrupt. You are not interrupting. I was waiting for someone to cook for. James eats nothing before 9 and Tony exists on espresso alone. Sit. Erida sat at the small table near the kitchen window. Outside, Chicago was fully awake, taxis and delivery trucks and people in bright coats moving through the morning. She watched it and felt for the first time in a long time, like a person observing life rather than surviving it. The woman set a cup of dark, rich espresso in front of her first, then a plate of pastries that were still warm from the oven, golden and faintly sweet. Then eggs, soft scrambled with herbs, the way Erida's mother had made them on Saturday mornings a very long time ago. She looked at the eggs and something broke open in her chest, quietly without warning. She did not mean to cry. She had spent 4 years learning not to cry because crying was a vulnerability that Jerry cataloged and used later. But the tears came anyway, and they were not the desperate kind, the kind that came from fear. They were the kind that come from something being returned to you that you had forgotten was missing. The woman in the cobalt apron came around the counter and sat down across from her without a word and took both of Erida's hands in her own. Her hands were warm and flour-dusted and completely certain. I'm sorry, Erida said, pressing her eyes with the back of one hand. Don't apologize to me in my kitchen, the woman said firmly. Not today. Not for that. She waited until Erida's breathing steadied. I am Rosa Ferrara, James's aunt. I run the restaurant operations for the whole hotel group. Erida Hakim. I know who you are. James told me you needed a safe morning. Rosa poured herself an espresso and settled in her chair with the air of someone with nowhere more important to be. Then we can talk or not talk. Whichever one you need. Erida ate. The eggs were extraordinary. When the plate was empty, she folded her hands around the espresso cup and said, How long has he been trying to leave? Rosa tilted her head. She understood immediately what was being asked. 3 years of serious work, she said. But wanting to leave longer than that. James is not a man who wanted the life he inherited. He is a man who was very good at it, which is a different thing entirely and not always a blessing. Is he safe? Erida asked. For someone to be around? Rosa looked at her steadily for a moment. Then she said, I will tell you what I told the last person who asked me that question, which was Carlo Ricci 3 years ago, when we were deciding whether this transition was real or just talk. James Ferrara has never in his life harmed a person who did not first try to harm him. And he has never in his life been unkind to someone who needed kindness. Those two things are consistent. The rest has been changing. She sipped her espresso. I would not bring you into this kitchen if I thought you were unsafe here. The kitchen door swung open. James walked in wearing a white linen shirt, the sleeves already rolled to the elbows, the tattoos on his forearms visible in the morning light. He was carrying a folder of papers and looked distracted until he saw Erita at the table. He stopped. Something shifted briefly in his expression. Good morning, he said, directing this equally at both of them but keeping his eyes on Erita for a moment longer. Sit down, my heart, I will make you eat something, Rosa said, and pointed at the chair as though he were 12 years old. He sat. He set the folder down and accepted the espresso his aunt placed in front of him, and for a few minutes the three of them sat in the kitchen in the early light while the city moved outside the window, and it was the most ordinary morning Erita Hakim had had in 4 years. 3 days passed in the kind of quiet that Erita did not trust at first, because she had been so long without it. She slept in the suite. She had coffee with Rosa in the mornings. She walked along the river in the early afternoons, her bright teal blouse a stripe of color against the gray-blue of the water. She called Nina, who came to the hotel on the second evening and sat on the edge of the suite's bed and held Erita's hand and did not ask for the whole story at once. She did not see James for those 3 days. Tony appeared at intervals, easy and friendly, bringing things she had not thought to ask for. A phone charger that fit her device, a bag from a pharmacy with everything practical and nothing presumptuous. She thanked him each time and he waved it off with the same easy grin. On the morning of the 4th day, Tony knocked on her suite door. Mr. Ferrara would like to see you downstairs if you're willing. There's been a development. The conference room on the 3rd floor was bright and wide, with floor-to-ceiling windows looking east toward the lake. James was there with a man Erita had not met yet, slim, precise, in a charcoal Armani suit with a slim gold tie pin, dark hair silver at the temples. He rose when she entered. Erita Hakim. I'm Carlo Ricci. I serve as legal counsel for the Ferrara Transition Initiative. He shook her hand efficiently. Please sit down. What I have to tell you is significant. She sat. James sat across from her, his expression careful and still. Your husband has retained a law firm in New York, Carlo said, opening a slim manila folder. They have sent a formal letter alleging that you withdrew funds from a joint account without authorization when you left 4 days ago. The amount cited is $4,200. That was my money, Erita said flatly. It was from my last paycheck at the firm. I never touched the joint accounts. I know, Carlo said. He turned a page. Because while we were reviewing this letter, I took the liberty of pulling the financial records our forensic accounting team had access to regarding Jerry Okafor's various business dealings. There is a thread here that concerns your personal finances directly. He turned the folder to face her and laid it open on the table. She looked at the pages for a long time. Columns of numbers, dates, transfer records. An account she had never seen before in a bank she had never heard of, with her name attached to it as beneficiary. Your parents left you an inheritance, Carlo said quietly. A life insurance payout and a property equity settlement, totaling just over $230,000. It was placed in a trust that matured when you turned 25. You turned 25 3 years ago. The room was completely silent. I never received it, she said. No, Carlo said. You did not. The trust documentation shows that the disbursement was redirected via a power of attorney filing made in your name approximately 4 years ago. The signature on that document is not mine. No, Ms. Hakim. It is not yours. She looked down at the table. The numbers on the page blurred and then cleared again. $230,000. Her parents' life insurance. The house on Belmont Avenue they had paid off in the last year before the accident. The last thing they had managed to leave her, and Jerry had found it and routed it away from her before she ever knew it existed. She pressed her hands flat on the table to stop them from shaking. James had not spoken. He was watching her from across the table with the same steady, unhurried quality he brought to everything, not filling the silence, not trying to manage what she was feeling. Just present. When she finally looked up, she did not look at Carlo. She looked at James. She told him about the 4 years then. Not everything, not all at once, but the shape of it. The way it had started with small corrections, then larger ones, then the steady, patient work of making her believe that the corrections were her fault. The isolation from everyone who might have told her otherwise. The way he had used her grief over her parents like a lever, returning to it every time she tried to push back, reminding her that she had no one else, that he was all she had. James listened. He did not interrupt. He did not tell her it was going to be fine. He did not perform sympathy. He simply listened the way people do when what they are hearing costs them something, when they are not hearing it from a distance but taking it in. When she finished, he said, "You are not going back to that." It was not a question. It was the plainest, most direct thing anyone had said to her in 4 years, and it landed in her chest like a hand against a door, holding it closed. "No," she said. "I am not." Carlo was already preparing the documentation. His pen moved efficiently across a notepad. Tony, standing near the door, had the expression of a man who was very pleased about something but was choosing not to say so. Outside the windows, Chicago moved in its ordinary way, enormous and indifferent and full of beginnings. The following morning, James spread a series of architectural drawings and financial projections across the long conference table and asked if she had time to look at something. He said it the way he said most things, without pressure, leaving the door open for no. She said yes. What she saw was comprehensive and serious. The Ferrara Hotel Group conversion plan covered 4 properties across 3 cities. It included capital allocation charts, projected revenue timelines, staffing structures for each location, and a detailed narrative of the legal transition work Carlo had managed over the previous 3 years. It was the document of a man who had made a considered, deliberate decision and was executing it carefully. Erida pulled the Chicago properties revenue model toward her and read through it in silence. After a moment she picked up a pen from the center of the table. "May I?" James gestured his assent. She made 2 marks, circled a cell in the occupancy rate projection, and drew a line connecting it to the seasonal adjustment column 3 rows below. "Your room rate assumption for Q2 is built on a full-year average occupancy," she said, "but Chicago hospitality occupancy drops significantly in January and February. If you use a seasonal weighted average instead, your Q2 revenue projection comes down by about 11%, and your break-even timeline shifts from month 18 to month 22. She looked up. "That is not a problem. It is just a more accurate picture." James was looking at her with an expression she had not seen on his face before. Attentive and slightly surprised, the way a person looks when something arrives that they were not expecting. "Carlo's team built that model," he said. "Carlo's team is very good at legal structure. Revenue seasonality is a different skill set." She set the pen down. "Where did you study accounting?" "Howard." "Before." She paused. "I had 2 years left of a finance degree when I dropped out." "To marry him." He encouraged it. He said it was a practical decision. She looked at the projection again because the model was easier to look at than the memory. "He did not want me to have a profession of my own." James was quiet for a moment. Then, "Would you want to work on this?" She looked up. "The financial models for the conversion," he said. "Not permanently, not as an obligation. As something to do while you figure out what comes next. Carlo's team does not have someone with practical hospitality finance experience. You clearly do, or the instinct for it." "James, I dropped out of my degree." "You just corrected a model that a full law firm's accounting department built. I am not particularly interested in the credential." She looked at the drawings on the table. The lobby layout for the Chicago conversion. The restaurant space where Rosa's kitchen would expand. The rooftop terrace marked for the launch event. "All right," she said. "I will look at the models." He nodded, that contained quiet acknowledgement. He reached across and turned the New York property projection toward her. They worked through the morning. James knew his business at a strategic level, the way people know things they have been building for years, and Erida found herself thinking more clearly than she had in a long time. The numbers made sense. The work made sense. She had forgotten how it felt to sit in a room and think about something difficult and know that she was capable of it. In the early afternoon, Tony appeared at the conference room door with 2 cups of coffee and the careful expression of someone carrying news. "Sal Bonetti called," Tony said, directing this at James. "He's not happy." James received this without reaction. "I know. He's making noise about the Chicago property. Says you are setting a precedent that damages the broader." "Tony." James said it quietly. "Handle it through Carlo. Sal gets his buyout structure and a clean exit. No meetings, no negotiations in person. Carlo only." Tony nodded once and withdrew, pulling the door gently closed. Erida had set down her pen while this exchange happened. She picked it up again and then set it down again. "Is that the kind of problem that goes away?" she asked. Sal is a businessman who sees his business model changing, James said. He turned a page in the projection file. When you offer a businessman a clean exit on favorable terms, the problem goes away. Men like Sal are not complicated. She thought about that. You are not complicated in that way either. He glanced at her. You could have handled him differently, she said. You chose not to. James was quiet for a moment. Outside the conference room windows, afternoon light was moving across the lake in long, flat plains. The hard part of this, he said at last, is not the legal work or the financial restructuring. It is remembering every day who I am trying to become. It requires a kind of discipline I did not know I was capable of. He paused. Some days it comes easily. Other days it does not. She looked at him across the wide table, this large, tattooed, careful man who had placed water on an armrest in the dark and asked for nothing in return. I know something about that kind of discipline, she said. He met her eyes. For a moment neither of them spoke. Then he turned back to the projection file and she turned back to the seasonal adjustment column, and the afternoon light moved slowly across the table between them. 2 weeks after the night flight from LaGuardia, Erida Hakim walked into the hotel's morning meeting in a cobalt blue blazer she had found at a boutique 2 streets over, her natural curls loose around her face, a travel mug of Rosa's espresso in one hand and a marked-up occupancy forecast in the other. Carlo looked up from his end of the table and said, with the precision he brought to every observation, "That model revision is correct, by the way. We are updating the full projection set based on your notes." "Thank you, Carlo," she said and sat down. James across the table did not say anything. But she had learned to read the small, contained things in his expressions, and what she read there was something that had no name yet but was becoming one. The meeting ran 90 minutes. They covered the timeline for the physical renovation of the lobby space, the staffing plan for the restaurant expansion, and the permit situation for the rooftop terrace, where the launch event would eventually take place. Erida contributed 3 corrections and 1 suggestion that Carlo wrote down without comment, which was his version of enthusiasm. She was in the hotel library on the 2nd floor 2 hours later, working through the New York property projections on a laptop Tony had produced for her from somewhere, when her phone buzzed. It was a message from a number she did not recognize. "I am in the lobby. Come down so we can talk like adults." She sat very still for a moment. Then she called Tony. "I know," Tony said, picking up before the second ring. He got through the front door before Marco at the desk recognized him. "I'm heading down now. Stay where you are." She did not stay where she was. She went to the mezzanine railing that overlooked the lobby and stood there, one hand on the polished wood, and looked down. Jerry was in the center of the lobby in a sharply tailored caramel suit, his posture precise, his face arranged in the composed, reasonable expression he wore in public settings. He had always been good in public settings. He was telling the young man at the front desk, in a voice pitched to carry without seeming to, that he was simply there to collect his wife's belongings, that he was worried about her well-being, that all he wanted was 5 minutes. Tony materialized from the direction of the elevator bank, still warm-faced, still easy. He reached Jerry in 4 strides and spoke to him in a low, private voice that did not reach the mezzanine. Then the elevator across the lobby opened and James walked out. The lobby went quiet in the way that lobbies do when something shifts in the atmosphere of the room. Not dramatically, not with any obvious signal. Just a change in the quality of the air. James crossed the marble floor at his ordinary pace, unhurried, and stopped beside Tony and looked at Jerry with the flat, patient clarity of a man who had already decided how this conversation would end. He did not raise his voice. Erida could not hear what he said from the mezzanine. She could only watch Jerry's posture change, the slow rearrangement of a man who had come into this room believing he held the advantage and was now performing the calculation of how much that belief was going to cost him. Jerry spoke for a moment. Then James spoke again, shorter this time, and reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a card which he held out between 2 fingers. Jerry took it. "Our attorneys will be in contact with yours by end of business today," Tony said at a volume that just reached the mezzanine. "Everything from this point goes through legal channels. Mr. Ferrara appreciates your understanding." Jerry looked at the card. He looked at Tony. He looked at James, who had not moved and was not going to move, and whose expression had the particular quality of something permanent. He looked up then, and his eyes moved along the mezzanine railing, and they found Erida. She did not step back. She stood at the railing with her hand on the polished wood and looked down at him, and for the first time in 4 years she looked at him from above rather than from below, and something in the geometry of that difference was enormous. Jerry left. His suit was still perfect. His face was still composed. He walked out of the lobby and the doors slid closed behind him, and Tony turned and looked up at the mezzanine and gave Erita a small, satisfied nod. She looked down at James. James had been looking up at the mezzanine already. He held her gaze for a moment, steady and still, and she felt it land somewhere important inside her, that steadiness. Not the steadiness of someone telling her not to worry. The steadiness of someone who had already taken the worry onto himself and dealt with it so she did not have to. She walked back to the library and sat down at the laptop and found that her hands, for the first time in 4 years, were completely still. She typed for 3 hours without stopping. The court granted the restraining order on a Tuesday morning. Carlo called Erita directly, which she understood was unusual for him, because he had Tony handle most communication. He read the order details in his precise, measured way, and when he finished reading he said, "The divorce petition has also been filed. Based on the evidence of financial fraud in the trust diversion, Mr. Okafor's attorney has advised him to cooperate fully. The inheritance recovery plus applicable damages will be processed within 30 days. Erita sat in the chair by the suite window. Outside the lake was very blue. "Thank you, Carlo," she said. "There is one more thing," he said. "The Financial Crimes Division of the Illinois Attorney General's office has taken an interest in the trust diversion documentation. I expect charges to follow. That process is independent of your civil matter and will proceed without requiring anything further from you." She absorbed this. "Erita," Carlo said, departing briefly from his usual brisk tone, "what was done to you was deliberate and systematic. I want you to know that the outcome here is not luck. You survived something very well designed to make survival difficult. That is your doing." She thanked him again and sat with the phone in her hand for a long time after the call ended. She thought about the Tuesday mornings 4 years ago when she had been afraid to call a friend. She thought about the bathroom door with the lock. She thought about the red sweater she had grabbed from the closet at random in the 11 minutes, not knowing then that it would become the first piece of herself she held onto. Rosa organized the dinner. She did it with the speed and authority of a woman who had been waiting for a reason to celebrate and had kept the ingredients on hand just in case. By 7 o'clock the hotel's private dining room, a warm, light-filled space off the restaurant with windows looking onto a courtyard, was set with white linen and candles and tall glass holders and flowers in deep rose and gold in the center of the table. There were 4 of them, Erita, James, Tony, and Rosa, who had categorically refused to sit in the kitchen while the rest of them ate her food. James wore a deep burgundy shirt, the sleeves rolled to the forearms, the geometric tattoos dark against his skin in the warm light. Across the table, Rosa had exchanged her cobalt apron for a deep coral blouse and wore her hair down for the occasion, silver-streaked and lovely. Tony had made a visible effort with a forest green button-down and was trying not to look pleased with himself about it. Rosa stood at the head of the table and lifted her glass. "To new beginnings," she said. "And to the people who choose them even when it is very hard to do so." Tony raised his glass and clinked it against Rosa's with exaggerated ceremony. "To new beginnings." James raised his glass and looked at Erita across the table. She raised hers and looked back at him. "To new beginnings," she said. The food was extraordinary as Rosa's food always was. There was pasta made from scratch, a broth-braised chicken that tasted like someone's grandmother's best memory, roasted vegetables in every color, and a dessert Rosa produced from the kitchen with the pride of someone who had been perfecting it for 20 years. Tony ate with great happiness and said so frequently. Carlo arrived mid-dessert with his wife, a warm-faced woman named Elena, and slid into a chair with the air of someone who was entirely prepared to be late to a celebration as long as they made it before it ended. After dinner, Erita and James stepped out onto the small courtyard terrace together. It was cold, the kind of clean cold that makes a city feel sharp and real. The courtyard lights were on, white and warm, and above them the sky was dark and clear. They stood side by side at the railing. "What will you do now?" James asked. His voice had the quality it always had in private, quiet and without any performance in it. She thought about the question seriously before answering. "I have a degree to finish. There are programs that will take me back mid-study. And I have money now, which means I have options." She paused. "I want to build something. I've been thinking for 2 weeks about what that means. I think it means work that is mine, not borrowed, not given to me. Work I do because I am capable of it." He nodded slowly. He was looking at the courtyard, at the light on the stone. "So do I," he said. "Still. Every day. The hotel group. Among other things." She turned to look at him. He was in profile, the line of his jaw clean in the courtyard light, the tattoos on his neck barely visible above the burgundy collar. "James?" She said his name quietly. What you did. What you have done, all of this for someone you met on a plane. I need you to know that I am not unaware of it. He looked at her then. His expression was the most open she had ever seen it. I know you're not, he said. The cold air moved between them and the city went on beyond the courtyard walls, and neither of them said the thing that was sitting in the air between them, because some things take time to become themselves properly, and they both knew that. But she stayed at the railing beside him for a long time, and the courtyard light was warm and it was enough for tonight to be exactly where she was. 6 months and 14 days after a midnight flight out of LaGuardia Airport, Erita Hakim stood on the rooftop terrace of the Ferrara Grand Chicago in a deep crimson wrap dress, her natural curls loose and full around her face, looking out over a city that had become, quietly and without her fully noticing, her city. The launch event had been Rosa's vision, executed with her characteristic combination of absolute authority and complete warmth. The rooftop was strung with lights in warm white, and long tables held flowers in ivory and gold. Guests moved between the terrace and the interior event space in bright summer clothes, because it was June, and Chicago in June knows how to be beautiful. A string quartet played near the bar. The printed program that sat at every place setting listed, under the heading Ferrara Hotel Group Leadership Team, the name Erita Hakim, along with the title Chief Financial Officer. She had finished her finance degree in April, through an accelerated completion program at Northwestern that her academic advisor, a no-nonsense woman who had looked at her transcripts and said simply, "You should have finished this years ago," had helped her arrange. She had passed her finals 2 weeks before the launch event. Tony was near the entrance in a navy suit, wide grin in place, doing what he had always done, making sure everyone who mattered was where they needed to be. Carlo had arrived early with Elena and was already deep in conversation with 2 of the hotel group's institutional investors, his gold tie pin catching the afternoon light. Rosa was everywhere at once, supervising the catering team and stopping every few minutes to embrace someone she loved. She had on a dress in deep violet and the coral scarf at her wrist, and she looked, Erita thought, like a person who had brought this moment into existence through sheer force of care. James spoke briefly before the formal reception began. He stood at the center of the rooftop in a sapphire blue suit, white shirt open at the collar, the tattoos at his neck visible above the fabric. He did not use notes. He spoke about the work of transformation, about what it cost and what it required, about the difference between power that comes from fear and power that comes from something you have built with your own hands and can look at in the morning without apology. He spoke about the people in this room who had believed the work was real when it would have been easier not to. He did not look at Erita while he spoke. She was glad of that because she was already trying very hard to keep her composure. The formal portion ended. Guests moved to the tables. The quartet shifted to something lighter. The city below the rooftop spread out in every direction, the lake glittering to the east under the June sun. Erita drifted to the far end of the terrace where the parapet met a raised garden bed full of white flowers. She set her hands on the stone railing and let the afternoon light fall across her face and breathed in slowly. She heard him before she saw him. The quiet, deliberate way he moved through a room, or in this case across a rooftop, never hurrying, never broadcasting intention. He came to stand beside her, looking out at the city. "Good speech," she said. "I meant it." "I know." A moment of silence. Below them the city moved and breathed. "I have been trying to figure out how to say something for 6 months, James said. His voice was the same as it had been at 30,000 feet over Pennsylvania. Low, without performance, carrying only what it needed to carry. She turned to look at him. He turned to look at her. "I built my entire life on the belief that softness was a liability," he said. "That you survived in the world I came from by being hard and clear and never needing anything you were not prepared to take for yourself. That was what I knew. That was what I was good at." He paused. "And then a woman got on a midnight plane and sat down next to me, and she was holding a water bottle in her shaking hands and she was not asking for a single thing, and something in me recognized something in her that I had not been able to name until now." He reached into the inside pocket of the sapphire jacket. He produced a ring held between his thumb and one finger. The stone was round and clear in a plain gold band. Simple. Honest. The kind of thing that did not need to announce itself. "I am not asking you to stay inside my world," he said. "I am asking you to help me build a new one. I have been building it for 3 years. But this part, this piece right here, I cannot build without you." Erita looked at the ring. She looked at the man holding it, this enormous, tattooed, careful, quietly extraordinary man who had set a bottle of water on an armrest in the dark and asked for nothing in return and had not stopped, from that moment, choosing her safety above everything else he could have chosen. She thought about the red sweater. She thought about the yellow bedspread she had never made it to. She thought about who she had been on that plane and who she was standing on this rooftop. She looked at him and said, yes. Simply. Completely. Without qualification. Rosa screamed from somewhere behind them. It was a sound of pure, uncomplicated joy, and it made Tony startle so hard he nearly dropped his champagne glass, and Carlo turned from his investors with an expression that was for Carlo, essentially a standing ovation. James slid the ring onto Erida's finger. The stone caught the June light and sent it in every direction. She looked at her hand and then she looked at him and she started to laugh, a real laugh, the kind she had not heard from herself in so long it felt like meeting something she had missed. He smiled. A full, real smile, the kind his face had been holding in reserve for the right occasion. It changed his face entirely. Rosa reached them first and embraced Erita with the intensity of a woman who had been waiting for this specific moment since a Tuesday morning when a young woman in a red sweater appeared in her kitchen doorway and needed eggs and a hand to hold. Tony arrived a step behind and clapped James once on the shoulder with enormous satisfaction. Below the rooftop, Chicago moved. Above it, in the afternoon light of a June day, two people who had each come through something enormous stood together in the middle of what they had built and let it be exactly what it was. A beginning, deliberate and real and entirely their own.